The 504 loan was never going to be approved. Nobody told him until it was too late. A machine shop owner in the Midwest spent 6 months trying to buy the building his business had outgrown. He negotiated the purchase price. He hired an attorney. He paid $8,000 for inspections, $6,500 for an appraisal, and another $12,000 in legal and closing costs. More than $26,000 into the process, the deal collapsed. Not because his business was weak, not because he had bad credit, because the 504 loan he was counting on was never going to be approved for the project he had structured. The occupancy numbers were wrong from day one, and nobody told him until it was too late. That story is not unusual. It happens because the SBA 504 program has specific rules about how a financed property must be used, and most first-time buyers do not know those rules exist until they are already deep into a deal. In this video, we are going to cover 4 deal killers that end 504 loan applications, not after the fact. Before you structure the project, before you hire the attorney, and before you write the first check. Welcome to Main Street Ledger. I'm Kurt Rose, CPA, former CFO of an SBA lender and entrepreneur. We cover small business acquisitions, SBA lending, franchise ownership, and business finance, all drawn from public sources and experience. If this is your first time here, subscribe below. This is education, not financial, legal, or investment advice. The SBA 504 program was built for a specific purpose. It finances the fixed asset components of a deal. Things like owner-occupied real estate and major equipment that the business will use directly in its operations. It does not cover the working capital, goodwill, or inventory components that often make up a significant portion of what a buyer actually needs. That is the entire design logic of the program. And when buyers treat it like a flexible general-purpose financing tool, that is when deals fall apart. Most first-time buyers approach a 504 deal the same way they would approach any other financing. They find a building, they get a rough sense that the business can afford the payment, and they assume the lender will figure out the rest. The problem is that the 504 program is not evaluated the way most buyers expect. Project eligibility, property use, and ownership structure all get examined before cash flow ever comes up. And if any one of those fails, the deal is done. Before we get to those 4, there is one decision that happens before any of them that most buyers never think about. This is not a 5th deal killer, it is a prerequisite. And it is the one thing entirely within your control before the process starts. That decision is who you borrow from. A 504 loan is not a single lender transaction, it involves 2 institutions. A bank holds the first lien, typically covering about half the project. A certified development company, the CDC, provides the second piece by issuing a debenture that gets sold into the secondary market. Those 2 institutions have to coordinate through the entire underwriting process. If the bank does not have a real track record with 504 loans and established working relationships with CDCs, that coordination breaks down. In my experience running an SBA lender, CDCs often leaned on the underwriting depth of the bank to supplement their own. A bank without that depth creates gaps in the process that surface late, when time and money are already committed. Lender inexperience does not make a bad deal approvable, but it can turn a perfectly good deal into a collapsed one. So before you go any further, ask your lender how many 504 loans they have closed. Ask which CDCs they work with and how often. If they cannot answer those questions specifically, that is information you need before the process starts. Now, the 4 deal killers. Deal killer 1 is the wrong kind of project. The 504 program finances existing buildings, new construction, and long-term equipment with at least 10 years of remaining useful life. That is the list. It does not finance working capital. It does not finance inventory. It does not finance day-to-day operating costs or non-qualifying debt. The program has a narrow lane by design because it was created to help businesses invest in productive long-term assets, not to be a flexible financing tool. The mistake buyers make is assuming the 504 works like an SBA 7A loan, which is significantly more flexible in how the proceeds can be used. It does not. If what you are trying to finance falls outside the eligible categories, no amount of business strength, credit quality, or deal structure fixes that. The project simply does not qualify, and the lender cannot approve it regardless of everything else. The practical check here is simple. Confirm what you are financing before you engage a lender. If the deal involves anything beyond real property, equipment, or qualified improvements, get that question answered first. Deal killer 2 is the occupancy problem. This is the one that caught the machine shop owner. SBA guidance generally requires that the borrowing business occupy a meaningful portion of the financed property. For an existing building, the standard threshold is 51%. For new construction, it is 60%. The reason the number is higher for new construction is that the business has the opportunity to build exactly what it needs, and the SBA expects it to use most of what it builds. Plan to those numbers. Leasing excess space to outside tenants is not automatically a problem, as long as the borrowing business still meets the owner-occupancy threshold. What kills the deal is when the leased portion is large enough that the property tips over into investment territory rather than owner-occupied business use. Here is what the machine shop owner missed. He planned to occupy 45% of the building and lease the remaining space to unrelated tenants. His thinking was that the rental income would strengthen the application by adding to total cash flow available for debt service. What actually happened is that the project failed the owner-occupancy test entirely. The rental income was not the issue. The issue was that the property was no longer functioning as owner-occupied business real estate under the program's definition. It was functioning closer to an investment property, and the 504 program was not designed to finance investment property. The lender could not restructure around it. The appraisal, the inspections, the legal work, all of it was done. And the deal was still dead. If you are evaluating a building that has space you will not immediately use, model the occupancy percentage explicitly before you structure anything. If you are looking at new construction, build to what the business needs and understand that the 60% threshold applies to your initial use plan. Deal killer 3 is the cash flow gap. This is the one most buyers expect to be the first test. It is actually the third, but it matters. Profitability is not the same as debt service capacity. A business can be genuinely profitable and still fail the cash flow test if the margins are thin, if the existing debt load is already significant, or if the current rent is already consuming a large portion of operating income. What lenders are evaluating is not whether the business makes money, it is whether the business generates enough cash after paying its expenses to cover the new annual debt payment, with room to spare. Buyers who are financing an expansion sometimes expect future growth to close that gap. Lenders do consider projected repayment capacity as part of the overall picture, but projections do not substitute for demonstrated cash flow. The underwriting is grounded in what the business has actually produced, and optimistic forecasts are discounted accordingly. The practical step here is to model the full debt service load of the 504 structure before you assume the business can carry it. The 504 involves 2 tranches of debt with 2 payment streams. Both of those payments are on the business. Know what that total annual number looks like against what the business is actually generating before you enter the process. Deal killer 4 is the borrower question. This one surprises most first-time buyers because they assume the underwriting is entirely about the business. It is not. The 504 loan underwrites the owners as well. SBA guidance generally requires any individual who owns 20% or more of the borrowing business to sign a personal guarantee on the loan. This is not a technicality that some lenders waive. It is a standard condition of the program, and it means that if the business cannot service the debt, the lender can pursue the owners personally. The common mistake is assuming that the CDC's involvement limits personal exposure or makes the guarantee indirect. It does not. The guarantee follows the owners directly. Credit history, outstanding personal obligations, and overall financial credibility all factor into the lender's confidence in the deal. A strong business with a weak ownership profile can still create problems at underwriting. If you have ownership partners in the borrowing entity, understand who is guaranteeing what before the ownership structure is finalized. That conversation is much easier to have before the deal is structured than after the lender raises it during underwriting. Here's what to take away from this. 4 tests. 4 places where a 504 deal either holds or falls apart. The 504 program has a specific purpose. It finances long-term productive assets, primarily owner-occupied real estate and major equipment. Working capital, inventory, and investment property are all out. If the project does not fit that lane, nothing else fixes it. Occupancy is a real underwriting test, not a formality. For existing buildings, the standard threshold is 51% owner-occupied use by the borrowing business. For new construction, it is 60%. Model those numbers before you structure the deal. The personal guarantee is not optional. Any owner with 20% or more ownership is generally required to guarantee the loan. The underwriting follows the owners, not just the business, and lender selection is not an afterthought. An inexperienced 504 lender without established CDC relationships can turn an approvable deal into a failed one. That is entirely within your control. Approval problems in a 504 deal almost always trace back to one of four places: project eligibility, occupancy, cash flow, or borrower credibility. Know where your deal stands on all four before you spend $1 on due diligence. Before you fall in love with a building, confirm that your project, your occupancy plan, your cash flow, and your personal financials all belong in a 504 deal. And make sure the lender sitting across from you has actually closed one before. If this helped, subscribe. We cover SBA lending, business acquisitions, franchise ownership, and small business finance in plain language every week. Research the deal before you fund the deal.